Welcome everyone to tonight's MARA Colloquium. The topic is the next major challenge in records management, and hint, it's on Facebook. Our speaker is Anil Shalawa. He's the founder and the CEO of Archive Social. And tonight's guest lecturer will speak about two very important topics, social media and also records and information management. But unlike other people, including myself, who do a lot of talking about those subjects, he actually works on solutions to the challenges that they pose. Anil is the founder and CEO of Archive Social, a social media archiving company that enables businesses to automate the management of content created through or posted to social networks such as Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and I'm sure you're all on the three of those. During his presentation, he will examine a number of approaches taken by organizations to address these challenges, and he will provide examples of social media records management in practice today. So I'm not going to take any more of our valuable time this evening. I'm going to introduce to you our speaker, Anil Shalawa. Anil, you can take the mic.
Hi, Pat, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction, as well as the invitation to speak here tonight. We often get a lot of interest when we speak, just because social media itself is such an intriguing topic. But I don't often get the chance to talk about this side of social media in front of a room full of records management professionals. So this is particularly exciting for me, and it's a real privilege. And as Pat mentioned, I do want to keep this somewhat informal in the sense that I will take opportunities throughout this presentation to pause, ask for comments in the chat room, and if we can make it work, even have some folks speak up. Now with this slide, I put this up here for a couple of reasons. One, I wanted to make sure that you all have a way to contact me if you have questions or if you'd like to discuss anything out of band after this presentation. I also wanted to give you a little bit of an overview on my background. So essentially, I have a background in computer science. I've been a software developer most of my life. And a few years back, as I was creating various social media applications, I stumbled upon this problem that many, many businesses are starting to face. And it's a problem around, of course, records management, of retaining important conversations and communications from all the social networks. I say that, though, to point out that I have neither a degree in archival science or any kind of training in records management. And I want to make you aware of that for two key reasons. The first is that I'm likely to butcher some of the terminology and not get the lingo right, so I ask you to forgive me in advance. And the second is to really point out that when it comes to true records management, all of you are actually the experts. We at Archive Social are trying to do what makes sense to us, and apply that to real-world problems and acquire customers and based on customer feedback continue to evolve. But I'm very interested in hearing from folks that are in this discipline in terms of how we can maybe close any loopholes in what we're doing and really tie in records management and social media into records management as a discipline as a whole. So with that, I think it's important to first start with why we're even talking about keeping social media records. And I don't think I need to really explain to all of you that social media has become an important business communication. It's obvious looking around that businesses of all types and sizes have adopted social media for a variety of communications, including customer service, recruiting, obviously marketing and advertising, business partnerships, and so forth. But I thought this was an interesting stat. This is just from about 2 weeks ago, and it really stuck out to me. So if you read it, basically what J.D. Power found was that 2/3 of the time a consumer goes to a company's social media site, they're not going there because they were drawn in by the marketing or to engage with some marketing campaign. 2/3 of the time they're going to that company's site because they're looking for help for customer service. And that's a really eye-opening figure, I think, to start with. Now, this is a slide that I pulled from one of our slide decks that our sales team uses, and it just goes to show that, for example, universities, as all of you are in, as well as in governments, if any of you as citizens are engaging with your government, you've probably noticed that many of these organizations are now leveraging social media for very important disclosures of information, photos of wanted suspects, details, and so forth. We've actually, in our engagements with customers, occasionally come across a situation in which a law enforcement division will put a posting on Facebook with information and a photo about a suspect, and a citizen will actually respond to that Facebook post with some information. Now, whether it's smart for that citizen to kind of put their name on that or not, it happens, and maybe the citizen or the law enforcement agency want to clean that up. But the management of that record is extremely important, because ultimately that information is the kind of information that used to come in through a hotline or some other means. Now, what's interesting about this topic, and we really kicked this off by saying the next major challenge in records management, it's a major challenge because people are finally coming around, we think now, to try to address it. But it's not that folks haven't been thinking about this. If you look at some of these postings that date back to 2009, 2010, discussing the challenge that various organizations are facing around getting their hands on these communications and storing them for whatever purposes that business or entity needs to store those communications. We have seen a variety of approaches taken to address this issue, which I will talk to in this presentation. But it's something that people are still grappling with today. In fact, the federal government has put out various directives around records management, and it is a long time frame for the agencies to satisfy that. I think something like 2019 is the go live date for that all of that to be in place. But that said, that really encompasses all types of electronic communications, and the federal government has taken stabs at social media in solving the social media problem. And in fact, last year they put together a council, the Federal Records Council. They made it one of the top priorities to solve social media records management. And the report is really surprising, because at the end of the day, they come back and one of their top recommendations is for federal agencies to copy and paste Twitter tweets, Facebook posts into a Word document and store that on a shared folder. So in many ways, that still is a state of the art, and so these organizations are struggling with a better way of doing this. Now, I've got a couple of overarching themes here on the slide of why you keep records. Business compliance is obviously one of the biggest drivers, especially since the last 5, 6 years with email in markets like financial services and healthcare and legal and so forth. So compliance is definitely a driver. SEC, FINRA are both in financial services. SEC also applies to any kind of publicly traded company. FOIA is Freedom of Information Act, which applies to government at all levels, including your cities, your counties, your state agencies, and of course the federal level. Litigation and e-discovery, of course, is a concern for any kind of mid to large business. If they get in a situation where they need to produce those records, they may be required to produce those records, assuming that they should be able to get to them in some way. And if they can't, that can be disastrous from a legal standpoint. And lastly, digital preservation. So as we engage organizations throughout the United States, and particularly in the government sector, we've continually coming across archivists and records managers that are also interested in the actual value of that content and how it reflects on society and culture, whether that's at a university or within a state or across the country as a whole. Now, I'm going to pause for just a second as I take a sip of tea. I wanted to see in the chat room if anyone else had any other overarching themes that they could add in here in terms of why keeping records is important. Okay, so I think these are 3 very general topics, and in most cases cover the use cases, but if someone comes up with something, I'm happy to hear it. And I'll go ahead and move on and take the next slide here and talk a little bit about why this is even a big topic. Why is this so hard? Well, if you think about social media, the reasons you want to keep at least some portion of your social media communication are the same reasons why you want to keep emails, important emails. or records of a website that are reflective of your business, or frankly, paper documents that are important to your business. The problem is keeping social media and capturing it and preserving it in many ways is far more difficult than any of those other forms of communications. So I've listed them all out here, but I want to talk through them just for a few minutes. To start with, we all know social media is very dynamic in real time. Now, that's not to say that an email can't come in throughout the day or websites can't be changed constantly, but social media really is a magnitude different in terms of how frequently communications happen. And largely that's a result of the fact that social media is often public. It's part of these social networks which have a high viral factor to them. And so you have the situation where you're communicating, but frankly, tens of millions of people could be seeing that and communicating back. And so it creates an environment where communications are happening very, very quickly. Social networks also tend to encourage short communications, which when that text box is smaller, it becomes easier for people to contribute, and so there's more involvement as well. The reason why this is important is that you can't take an approach to social media that's let's say a website where you're capturing it every few months or even every week. By then it may be too late. You really have to figure out how can I capture social media as continually as possible to account for its dynamic nature. The next next bullet point on here is content is heterogeneous. And this is really important. If you think about email, it's a long standardized format, and it's a rather simple type of format. Same thing with websites. The HTML standard is fairly mature. It continues to get updates, but those take a while, and it's one standard. But if you look at social media, a Twitter tweet is completely different from a Facebook photo. It's completely different from a LinkedIn profile. These are non-standardized. These are formats that are entirely proprietary, created by these companies, and they continue to evolve. So tomorrow, Facebook could change the way they represent a wall post. And there's no standards body that has to approve that. There's no process, it just happens. And that's a really big concern that I think oftentimes in our industry is overlooked. We have competitors that want to, just in general, folks want to think this is a simple problem. Let's just treat social media like email, and it's really not that simple. The middle bullet point here is one of the more obvious ones, but again, it creates a whole host of challenges. These communications never have to pass through your network. You can post something on Facebook on behalf of your company by using your iPhone. Even worse, the people that then respond to your Facebook post or comment on it, those communications may never pass through your internet. They go straight to Facebook. So these are communications hosted again on third-party servers. Getting to this data can be a challenge. You have to actually go out and get it. It's not like email where all of the email comes into your email server and it just sits there. And in order to archive email, you just reach into the email server and you take a copy of it. You can't really do the same thing with social media. You have to go out and get it. Now, part of this is the fact that a part of this creates a problem with IT organizations because IT no longer has the ability to provision access. So an IT department can't decide who has an email address. And even worse, IT can't decide that when they want to get to someone's email, they can just go do it. Right? Like they do with email, they can just go do it. They can't do that with social media. If they want to get to someone's Facebook data, IT or anyone in the company may not be able to just go to that Facebook account because it may have been created by an employee. And therefore, you have to work through that employee if that employee cooperates to be able to get access to that account. And then that really leads us into the fact that it's distributed. So now what we're seeing is if you go to, I'm sure San Jose State has this problem, as every university does, there are literally dozens, if not hundreds of Facebook and Twitter accounts being created that are branded for a university without the university blessing, giving their affirmation of that. So, for example, we work with NC State University here in North Carolina, and I walked in and spoke to the chief communications officer about a year ago, and I said to him, how many Facebook and Twitter accounts do you think are out there representing NC State, using the brand of your university? And the chief communications officer said maybe 90. I was then able to open up my laptop and show him how we had collected more than 130 Facebook and Twitter accounts representing their brand. And of course, this is a huge problem in the communications department's eyes because for the first time ever, they don't have the oversight and control that they used to have in terms of communications that are going out on behalf of the business. And this happens everywhere. This happens in the government, especially the fact that government itself is distributed. People across the city may create Facebook accounts for a variety of things, Twitter accounts for a variety of events. It happens in large businesses and small businesses too, where an employee simply has to go on one of these social networks and 3 or 4 clicks can create a profile that in some way may be branded representing that organization. So I see some questions. I wanted to stop real quick. And the one question I see here from Jenny is, can they take legal action against those accounts? Jenny, is this in regards to employees creating accounts representing the organization's brand without the organization knowing? Yeah, so that's a great question. I'm not by any means an attorney, but I did present on this topic recently with an attorney, and it's a very, very tricky issue. There was actually a case where, this phone dog case, where a guy, he had a Twitter account for a company called Phone Dog. His name was Noah. So he created this Twitter account called Phone Dog Noah. And as he worked for that company, servicing clients, he built up a pretty large Twitter following, I think something on the order of 18 to 20,000 Twitter followers. Noah then decided to leave the company, and he took that Twitter handle with him. Of course, he renamed it from Phone Dog Noah to his actual name, which I forget at the moment. And the company at the time was fine with it. They said, okay, you know what, if you don't mind occasionally just responding to tweets that come your way, that's fine, just take your account. But several months down the road, the company showed up with a lawsuit that said, you have an important customer list of ours, and we want that back. And we think every follower that you took with you is worth $1.50. And since you've had 20,000 followers at $1.50 a piece for the last 8 months, you now owe us X hundreds of thousands of dollars. So this is a case that's out there. I don't think it's been settled because it's so gray. What the company should have done is really, this a lot of times comes down to policy. The company should have upfront created a social media policy saying any social media account created for usage in engaging with our customers and performing business activity, and particularly if it's reflecting our brand, is property of the company, period. Even if you're managing it today, it's property of the company. And if they would have done that up front, they would have saved themselves a whole lot of grief. And I guess I'll add on to that, when people, sometimes it's not even the employee, sometimes it's just somebody random. So somebody at University of North Carolina might go and create an account representing NC State as rivals. And it gets really, really tricky. I think if you talk to, we've talked to our customers about this, if you talk to anyone in terms of trying to go down the processes of claiming trademark infringement and getting that account shut down or claiming it back, it's just a hassle. So we always encourage folks to think about these issues up front and put that in their social media policy. And thanks for that question. That was a good question. And finally, it's distributed, it's managed by employees, it's outside of your control, it comes all sorts of formats, and it's really dynamic. But let's say you solve all of this and you're able to store the data. What now? Well, the whole reason you stored it was to get it back out. And today's systems are not well designed to get social media back out in a way that makes sense, that really accommodates for the fact that social media is not just real-time and heterogeneous, but that it's also very rich and interactive. So if you do a search and you find a Facebook post, you probably want to get all the comments on that Facebook post. If you search for a photo, you want all the text and commentary around that photo as well as the photo itself. So that creates a bit of a challenge as well. Okay, so I'm going to, again, take a moment here and give this another shot. So I know that in the bar on the left side, you've got this check mark icon. And I want to ask a question, if I could do a quick poll here. Who in our audience has ever tried or worked on any kind of technology or application or solution to capture social media records? Give me a check if you've done it and an X if you have not. All right, so we got 1, 2 that have, and those of you, if you could, in the chat room now, can you put just a brief statement of what type of technology you used or what approach you used, whether that was manual capture or some kind of archiving product or any other technology? No volunteers. Okay, that's all right. Well, let's go ahead and okay, Lisa's typing. All right. So I save tweets in a Word document. Also use Hootsuite. Great. Appreciate that, Lisa. So those are, you know, it's good to hear that for your library you're taking steps to at least preserve this information in some way, because if you don't do anything, it does become very transient and hard to reproduce. Let me take the talk off here if Lisa, you want to speak up.
Oh, no, I just want to, I think it'd be easier for me to speak than type, so thank you very much for the question. I just wanted to add that my organization, which is Royal Bank of Canada, has recently done an RFP for exactly this this topic in capturing social media. And you asked if anyone had done that, and we were looking at, I don't want to, I'll just name them, Hearsay, Acteon, Smarsh. These are all tools that, according to my understanding, can do this sort of capturing of external social media sites and for compliance and records management requirements. So I will end that there, only because you asked the question, but thank you.
Well, thank you, Lisa, so much for speaking up and making that contribution. And I will definitely try to address as unbiased as possible in as unbiased fashion as possible as we go through some of these slides. Some of those folks are our competitors, but there are definitely different approaches to this problem, and every approach has some advantages and some disadvantages. So glad to hear that you have some context in the types of solutions out there, and I'll definitely try to spend just a moment or two digging into what those types of solutions do and what they do well, and where are some of the gaps, including with solutions like ours as well. So let's start, and this is really a build-up, and I'll be very, very transparent with you. This is a build-up in how we approach this problem at Archive Social in terms of what are the ways that people can start to address this issue. Why is that a good way to do it? Why is it a bad way to do it? And if there are holes, what's the next step? What's the next thing that we can try to fill that gap? So starting off, this I would say is actually not a solution, and hopefully all of you recognize that. Relying on the social networks to keep your data forever. And I think someone in the chat room mentioned Hootsuite, which is great because it does cache information to some extent. But I'll start by saying the social networks themselves are not a record-keeping place for keeping records. They're not an archive. And for the simple matter that anything can be deleted on Twitter and Facebook today and can never be accessed again. So by definition, that would fail a number of record retention requirements. And in fact, interestingly enough, I'm sure many of you saw the news, I think it was December, that Twitter came out and said we're launching the Twitter archive. So every Twitter user can now, or should be able to soon go to their Twitter profile and download their entire Twitter archive. And I'm saying archive and using quotation marks that fit here in my chair. And the reason why is that archive is not really an archive. What Twitter is allowing you to do is at any point in time go and download all of the tweets from your public timeline that are still in Twitter. So rather than an archive, it's more of a snapshot, right? So anything that you deleted from your public timeline is not going to be in that download. It's not going to be in that archive that they call. So it's definitely not a good idea to rely on social networks for that one reason alone, that data can be deleted. But as we've seen with Twitter and the next social network that crops up, there are often limitations to getting back to data even if it hasn't been deleted. So just being able to get 3, 4, 8, 12 years back into your social media history, it's really hard to trust that you'll be able to do that, because these companies are not in the business of keeping your data forever or keeping your data in a legally sound fashion that most businesses require. And then just to touch on Hootsuite real quick, The analogy I tend to make there is that these Twitter clients that you use, to some extent, are keeping a cache for you, and that's great. But you have to think about these clients very much like Outlook, your email client. Your Outlook interface or your email client on your smartphone is caching this information, but it is no means a records management solution, because it's just temporary. You would never rely on Outlook or your smartphone as your email archive. And so it's somewhat of a stopgap. It's better than doing nothing, but it's important to be aware of the limitations of using the client as a record store. So where do we go from here? And again, this is another. This is something that all of these things that I'm going to walk through here are solutions, I'll call them, that we get from talking to customers and people in the industry. And I really wanted to address them one by one. So again, in my view, this is not really a solution for records management. It's sort of avoiding the problem. It's kind of like saying, well, just don't use social media at all. But there is a lot of confusion, I think, with folks out there that are using social networks but aren't necessarily as savvy enough to understand exactly how all these networks work. So we'll hear a lot of times from prospective customers that they are not worried about keeping social media records because they're using social media one way and they're disabling comments. So I took a screenshot from Facebook just as an example. This really rings true for virtually all the networks, is that you really can't turn off the two-way conversation on social media. So if you post on Facebook, you may be able to turn off the ability for other folks to also post on your wall, but you can't turn off the ability for them to comment on what you've already put out there. And those comments could be of value. Likewise, you may receive private messages on both Facebook as well as Twitter. Twitter, you may receive mentions, and a mention, given that it's addressed to someone with that @ symbol, very well could be perceived as a message received, like an email that's received. And so there's no way to turn this off. And so we like to make it very clear to folks we talk to that this may sound like a solution at a high level, but in practice, it doesn't work. It doesn't really make sense in the context of social media. Just copy and paste. And I actually just did this to see how it would work and took a screenshot of it. Again, doing something is far better than nothing, and this is obviously very cost-effective from a purchasing standpoint. It's not very cost-effective from a human resource standpoint, but it's an easy thing to do. Just copy and paste it, put it somewhere, and from a legal situation, again, this is not ideal by any means. So if you were to go to court, the first question would be, well, how do I know you didn't just type this up in Word today and edit it? There's really nothing here that proves the authenticity of it and that ensures that it is the content that you supposedly captured. But as you saw, the federal government thought this was a key recommendation. So a lot of this boils down to state of the art. So today this may actually fly in certain situations. You may go to court and be able to show this to someone, and maybe the court would weigh this against the other evidence and say, all right, well, at least you kept some record and I trust it. But there's obviously a lot of holes with this because it's so easy to falsify. This takes us to the next step. So rather than copy and pasting into Word and crossing your fingers that Word or whatever word processor will preserve the content the way you want it to, you could just take a screenshot. And we often talk to prospective customers where they have somebody going through their social networks on say a monthly basis or a quarterly basis taking screenshots. We'll also see them not take screenshots proactively, but if, for example, a government organization or a brand sees something very offensive and obscene show up on their site, they may want to delete that right away, but before they delete it, they'll take a screenshot so they have at least some kind of record. So again, given the state of technology and the understanding in the industry today, this is definitely better than nothing. Again, just like being able to edit a Word document, it's not hard at all for anyone to Photoshop something. So if it comes down to it and you really need to be able to prove that this is real, you're not going to be able to do that because it's too easy to falsify. But it may give you a little bit of an edge if you have some kind of record versus nothing. We actually saw a case a couple of months back with the city of Honolulu where the police department there was getting posts on their Facebook page from a gun advocacy group. So essentially, this gun advocacy group was posting things like, you should carry your own guns because you can't rely on the police to defend you. Now, whatever your political views are or views are on gun rights, you can clearly see why the police department didn't like that being on their page. But what they did was they simply deleted that content. And now a lawsuit has been filed by this gun advocacy group claiming First Amendment violation. This will go to court. And in court, of course, one of the first questions the court will have is, well, can you show me the content you deleted? So if Honolulu, I don't know whether or not they did anything to keep these records, but if they had a screenshot, they may be able to at least provide some context for why they did what they did. But if they don't have a screenshot, then there's a chance that that could actually backfire against them, because that's evidence that's important and they've got a claim and they can't produce it. And so then the jury or the judge can then maybe incline just to assume the evidence would have not been in their favor. So what about storing the original source? I'm guessing some of you have heard this before, and this seems to be a common practice from what I've gained in the records management world, that the content of the record obviously is what's most important, and not the physical form. So if you can store a record in at least one of its forms, you don't really need to store it in the other various forms. And that makes sense to me. So if you, for example, issue a press release, and then maybe you have a tweet that very simply links to that press release, you may not need to keep that tweet because the real context of that tweet was already captured in that press release, and you're ideally keeping a copy of that press release somewhere. However, this really goes back to the whole one-way versus two-way and what is social media. When you put this content out on social media, you may be posting it and keeping one record of it, but there may be an entire conversation that forms around it. And that conversation, those comments and replies may actually be of importance. And so even if you don't necessarily need to keep your posts, you probably need to be thinking about keeping the replies and the comments coming back in regards to your post. There's also some subtleties here. For example, if you post something on Facebook, as many of you know, you may post a link, and some of these social networks will derive the content out of that link. So they'll show a thumbnail, they'll show a title and some description. And again, that may be of importance and it may not be being kept everywhere. So it's just important to keep that in mind. I'm just looking at the question in the chat room right now. Makes me wonder if there's any place for a person or organization to capture their own commentary on someone else's timeline. That's actually a very, thanks for asking, it's actually a very difficult technical problem. So today I could go post on one of the hundreds of millions of Facebook pages out there. And Facebook, frankly, doesn't provide a mechanism for some technology to go figure out where all the email posts to. You can go look at my own wall, but you can't easily figure out where other people are commenting. And that's something that we've hit with Facebook that's just a technology limitation. I'm trying to think if it's an issue with other networks, but what I think this raises is that there are gaps. No matter who has the best technology on the market, no solution is 100% perfect. And the way we explain this to clients is risk is not a 0% or a 100% game. You're not either completely risky or have no risk at all. But what record keeping and archiving can do for you is get you as close to zero risk as possible. But that definitely is one of the gaps. Good question. All right, so let's look at some real technology here. One of the most prominent ways that folks have been dealing with this problem, outside of, I would say, financial services and some of the regulated, really highly regulated markets, but especially in the government and education, and I think for many of the brands, it's using website archiving. So the concept here is that website archiving today can capture web pages. Facebook.com is a web page. Twitter.com is a set of web pages. So we can just archive those web pages and therefore keep social media records. And I think this to start with, is one of the first real solutions to this problem. If your website archiving technology is good enough, and that's what you have in your hands, and maybe you're using it for other purposes, it may make sense just to start pointing that to your social media sites. Now, when I say is it good enough, that's an important point. We see technology like Archive It, for example, which is a nonprofit, a really great organization. But we've seen folks try to apply Archive It to social media archiving. We've seen a number of vendors out there that are also for-profit that have similar type of technology to Archive It. And the real issue here is that website archiving is all about capturing a website, looking at all the links, following those links, and then capturing what those links take you to. And so you typically set up a seed, a first page to start on, and then you let it crawl those links to get as much content as you're willing for it to run for. So you might say, well, crawl it 4 links in. One problem with that is that with social media, if a comment shows up on a Facebook post that's, say, 3 years old, you may not crawl far enough to get back to that. And that can happen at any time. A social media post from the past can blow up and become viral and become very important from a business record-keeping context. And Facebook may prioritize that to the top, but it may not. And so your crawling is a limiting factor in how far back you can go. But a more fundamental issue with website archiving is that technology that just follows links gets really stuck when it comes to today's social media sites. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with Facebook. If you go on Facebook, links are no longer links. When you want to see more posts, you just scroll down, and out of magic, 10 more posts show up. When you see a link for view more comments or view previous comments, you click on that. That's not a link that takes you somewhere. It magically loads a whole set of comments. And so web archiving technology, which is built to follow links, now gets confused. Rather than following that link, what it really needs to do is start to interpret the scripting that's happening on these sites. And for the most part, this is a really hard problem. We haven't seen, aside from one vendor that I've seen, I haven't seen any web archiving tool handle this well. And there's one vendor that I think does this better than others. But it is a very hard problem. And the moment that Facebook changes their script, it's brittle and it breaks. And so with that, I asked which vendor. And so I'm happy to give a plug to one of the vendors, is Page Freezer. And you will see Page Freezer is a competitor of ours. They're a social media archiving solution as well. So they have the best technology that I've seen out of the products I've looked at. And I haven't necessarily looked at all of them, but I've seen them able to capture the dynamic behavior of a website and replay it back. Now that said, aside from having to crawl, there's another major problem with website archiving. Capturing the HTML from Facebook.com, at least in my opinion, and I think I can convince many people of this, is not capturing the real record. To me, using website archiving to capture social media, I like to look at the analogy. Would you use website archiving to capture email? Would you point Archive It or Page Freezer or any other tool out there at gmail.com or hotmail.com and call that email archiving? And you absolutely wouldn't, right? Because what you're doing is you're capturing a rendering of that content in HTML form. But just like email, social media not only shows up on Facebook.com, but it shows up on your iPad and your iPhone and your BlackBerry and all sorts of other Android devices. And in each of those cases, it may be a little bit different. And so, in my view, that's not the real record. It's a rendering of the record, but it's missing the actual metadata. It's missing what's underneath that HTML. So if you go to Facebook.com and you do view source, you'll see a bunch of HTML for a Facebook post, but you won't see all of the metadata that is associated with that content. Just like if you were to go to gmail.com and look at view source, you're not going to see the SMTP message format of the email. You're going to see the HTML rendering of it. You'd have to click on a different button in Gmail to see the actual original source of that message. So that is something to really keep in mind. Website archiving can take you into the realm of automated capture of this content and to some degree solve the problem, but you have to be aware of the kind of records you're keeping at that point. And then doing a search is another issue where, well, say you've caught website captures of Facebook.com for the last 5 years, and now you want to search for a single keyword. Well, what it's going to do is search across that entire web page content. What if you wanted to search just within Facebook photo posts? Well, you can't because you're just searching websites. So there are some issues with that. But by and large, this has been the state of technology. And in fact, one of the organizations that we've been able to work with has really been a thought leader in this space. I wanted to point you to a case study that's out there. So the state of North Carolina, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the work they do at the state archives down there, but in many ways they're seen as thought leaders, at least in the public sector. In fact, the Council of State Governments just in August published this case study on how North Carolina has been using web archiving to capture social media. So I encourage all of you to follow that link and check it out. It definitely is very informative. Now, fortunately for us, and not to make this too much of a plug, but we had also been engaging with the state of North Carolina prior to this case study going live and really showed them a different way of capturing these records. And in December of 2012, actually about August, they switched to this new mode. But in December of 2012, we did something really exciting, which is we launched the world's first fully interactive social media archive that anyone around the world can search and poke around in. So that's the link in the slide, and with that, thanks for sharing that in the chat room. Definitely encourage all of you to click on that, run some searches, and see how it works, and I'd love to hear your feedback. So I named a number of issues, and I kept going on web page archiving because, again, it's capturing the rendering of that content. And I gave you the analogy of, well, you don't really want to use, you wouldn't do that with email. You wouldn't go capture gmail.com and call it email archiving. You would go straight to the email server. Well, that's where social media backup type tools came into play. And some of the first of these came in back in 2008. Backupify is one that you may have heard of that came out as a consumer-oriented tool for just keeping your own social media history. They've since shifted more of their focus to Google Apps and Salesforce, but they still have that consumer product out there that all of you can try signing up for free and check it out. But here's a post from that. So one of the issues that we saw when we were looking at this space, well, what the social media backup tools are doing makes a lot of sense. Go to the network, go to Facebook directly, go to Twitter directly, pull the real records from those APIs, pull them frequently. Don't wait 2 months to do this and run a crawl, but do this as much as you can. And get that real data and store it. The problem we saw, and what really I think pushed us to continue to work in this space, is that backup is very different from archiving. Backup is all about having a copy of your data in case you need to restore it. In Backupify's case with social media, you really couldn't restore it, but it was just a way of having a copy. But there's a big distinction there, and in fact, Backupify themselves wrote a blog post about backup versus archiving that I can dig up the link for, where backup is about restore, but archiving is really about long-term preservation of records and indexing records and being able to search them and produce them. And so this is really, I think, for us, was that final stepping stone to say, you can go to the network, you can get that data, but how do you store that data and present it back in a way that really fulfills the need of records management and really serve as an archive? So I walked through all of those because that really takes us to where we are today and what we believe is the state of the art, truly the state of the art when it comes to technology. But it boils down to 4 important questions when you look at vendors like us that have come out around social media archiving, and we're not the only ones. To me, it really boils down to 4 key characteristics. The first is frequency. Again, you don't want to run this every 2 weeks. Maybe nightly is okay. But in our view, you want to capture this even more frequently. You can't get it real time because technology doesn't exist. You can't get it the instant it's posted. But how soon can you capture it? So we're looking at an archiving solution for social media. Frequency is definitely an important factor because the larger that time window, the larger the risk that record will be lost. Comprehensiveness, again, you want to be able to capture this content regardless of how it gets on Facebook.com. And there are a variety of technology approaches that around how much data you can capture. But you want to be able to get that data if it's out there, and you want to be able to get as much of it. And again, every archiving tool solution does this to a different degree. Authenticity is something that I've hammered on a little bit when it comes to screenshots and web archiving and so forth. do you have the full metadata? In fact, what we've seen now is in various areas of law and e-discovery, metadata is incredibly important. We've also seen it with state FOIA laws, Freedom of Information laws. For example, the state of Washington actually has it written in their public record law that you need the metadata. We're hearing that some organizations are worried now that malicious people out there will file a lawsuit because they know you're not keeping the metadata. So you have to get as much of that data as you can keep. But even more importantly, if no one's being malicious, the reason why you're keeping this data is in case you have to produce it at some point. And oftentimes businesses are driven to do this because of legal reasons. And so you want to make sure it holds up in court. So what is that solution doing to preserve that authenticity and to prove that that record wasn't typed up today? And finally, storing it again is great, but that's only half the equation. When you produce it, context is incredibly important. If you did a search and you found a Facebook comment, well, what post is that comment on? What's the full context of that conversation? If you're storing photos, do you have the full photo, or do you have just tiny thumbnail version of it? So various types of social media communications have their own data formats, but a lot of them are rich, and it's not good enough just to throw them all in a database. In fact, I'll go back to the backup screenshot here. You'll see status, status, inbox, comment, status, 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 comment, comment, and literally that's all you get. So if you click on any of these comments, you have no idea what it relates to, and that's a real problem. So how do you make this possible? And I guess one thing I want to pause with Lisa. Lisa asked the question: storage in the cloud. Absolutely. The vast majority of vendors today are storing social media data in the cloud, and the realization there is that this is cloud data from birth. So it's coming from the cloud that Facebook and Twitter run into some other cloud, and it really, because of this, allows vendors like us to deploy the solution in a large company in half an hour or an hour, because there's no installation, there's nothing to do. You just log into your account, tell us which Facebook and Twitter accounts you have, and give us permission, and we can then talk from our cloud network to the cloud of Facebook and Twitter, pull that data in. And of course, what you want to see in an archiving vendor is that, yes, they're storing in the cloud, but make sure that they're never reducing the security or privacy of that information. So if they're taking it out of Facebook, are they using encryption? Who can get to that database? How is that data stored? Is it stored encrypted at rest? Is it replicated so that it won't be lost? You want to make sure that when it's moving from one cloud to the other, to a vendor, that the vendor is doing everything they can to follow cloud best practices. And finally, getting down to the end of this, when it comes to social media archiving, what we're seeing today in the market are really two technology approaches. The first is proxy. And this is, I think, the first approach out of the gate, just because the APIs were not as mature at that time. So back in 2008, 2009, companies came out with this approach where you as a customer would deploy some kind of network device or software that would sit on your network and listen in on the network traffic. It's basically a proxy. All the traffic on the network passes through your black box. And from there, you try to preserve the social media records. The nice thing about the solution is that it can capture anything. So if you're on a network and folks are using Facebook, whether they're using the wall or events or Facebook answers or whatever else, the proxy should be able to pick up all of that because it's traveling right through that box. The problem is, although it can pick up any type of content, it can't pick up all instances of those communications. So you may be at work with this proxy, but you may then just get on your smartphone and say, well, I'm just going to post to Facebook straight from my smartphone using my 3G or LTE coverage, and it never goes to the corporate network, never gets picked up by the proxy. And even worse, when people reply to you and comment, of course, that content may never go through your internet, and therefore your proxy is not going to pick that up. So that is definitely a trade-off. The API, on the other hand, can't get any type of content. So Facebook might say, well, you really can't get to the answers communications just because we don't want to expose our API. And so any kind of API solution, which Archive Social is an API solution, is limited based on the type of content that the social network exposes. That said, it can, an API solution doesn't care how that content gets there. So if it shows up on Facebook or Twitter, it's in the API and we can pull it down. So you no longer have to worry about bring your own device, BYOD. No longer have to worry about, well, when people respond, how do I get that? It just happens. And so the advice that we give is, yes, we can't capture every single slice of Facebook, but here are the slices of Facebook that we do capture, they're the main ones, and in your organization, use policy to enforce what people are allowed to use. We are also seeing some folks come out with proxy API hybrids, and again, these tend to be more enterprise-type solutions where you deploy something on your internal network. IT has to do it, but then it uses the API to supplement what the proxy can't capture. And finally, I'm going to try to leave almost 8-10 minutes for questions. This is just a screenshot from our product, so if you click on that link, this is what you would see. I think this may also be in the upcoming book, plug for Ms. Frank's upcoming book. I believe the screenshot's the one that was used. And essentially, I encourage you again just to click around this interface and provide feedback to me. What I wanted to show here was authenticity, capturing the underlying metadata underneath this record. So there's a couple of sentences at the top. And all that metadata is for that same post. Every comment individually would have its own metadata as well. We use digital signing techniques and so forth to prove authenticity. And then on the context side, again, this looks and feels like Facebook, and you can actually see the content in line. You can see comments on the post they belong to. So this is the approach that we've tried to take to try to address the issues around context and authenticity. And with that, I appreciate you listening to me talk for most of these 53 minutes. I have my contact information here on the slide, and I'm about to release the mic. So if any of you have questions, I'd love to hear them.
If you have a question, just click on the hand button, raise your hand. You could also do the same thing if you just like to make a comment.
So I hope I'm not violating protocol here, but I did see a question here from Deidre. Is there a common standard for the metadata that speaks to the authenticity of these materials? Again, no. The metadata that we saw on that previous slide was the data that Facebook provides about this post. It's in a format called JSON, which is a technical format for exchanging information. LinkedIn has its own XML for its own formats. Twitter has its own. And there's no standard because these are essentially private companies that have created this whole site and created these formats, and this is how they decided to represent them.
Any other questions, either in the chat area or using the mic? I see Lizette has one.
Yeah, that's a good question, Lizette. So would the metadata only be available through the API? Yes, this metadata is only available. This is the data this is literally the data you get back when you ask the API for give me this Facebook photo, this post. So, if you were to go to the website, there may be some user IDs and some data embedded in the HTML to support the rendering of it. But certainly this data is not available in any other way than talking directly to Facebook via its API.
Go ahead.
Hi. Just a quick question about, we're all archivists and records managers, just about potential migration strategies as technology changes. Social media is so cool and changing and vibrant about, the next great tool. What are your thoughts about, migrating this data as an archive to the next data or the next data format?
Great question. One of the reasons that we focused on social media specifically was to try to attack this problem of the fact that the data formats continue to change. And so internally, we have an architecture that's essentially versioning all of these data formats And so if Facebook changes the format of the wall post tomorrow, we can show you the new format in the new wall posts in that new format and still preserve the old wall posts in the old format. That's a unique architecture and something that we have as an advantage because we started with social media. But kind of to take us beyond Archive Social, there is no standard and there's no blessed approach in the industry for how to deal with this. So what we've done, and largely, to be honest with you, we've done because we're a small company and people want to have confidence in our product, is that we've preserved that raw metadata exactly like it is, and at any point in time, you have the option to get out your entire archive. So you can click on two clicks, get a zip file that has a rendering of every record, whether you want it as a PDF or an HTML. But what's more important is the raw metadata for every comment, post, photo, so forth comes straight out in a zip file that you could walk away with and ideally feed into some other system. And so the belief there is that if you were taking this data out of our system into some maybe more standardized system or the next vendor that you wanted to use, that if we gave you the full metadata untampered with, that they would be able to ingest that correctly. And I actually want to add on to that really quickly. One thing that I'm open to, and I actually asked this of Professor Franks, is as archivists and records managers, what is the standard today that's out there that we as Archive Social and the other vendors in this industry should be looking at? Is there a center of your universe when it comes to a EDRMS, if I have that correct? I may butcher that, but a records management central solution and a standard. If folks believe, have an opinion on that, I definitely am interested in hearing what that standard might be.
So you work with electronic records more than I, but what seems to be the case is that there is guidance for metadata as far as what should be captured, but we have no actual metadata that is required or that is a standard for records management. What do you do at your place of employment?
No, and it's a really great question, and I think what the courts would look for, and I think that there are ISO standards about how to migrate one format to a next. So I think if you did as best you possible could about migrating from one format to a next according to ISO standards, you'd be in a good shape. But I think that the courts and what laws of evidence would say is that as long as you've documented everything and had well documented policies and procedures on how you did that and what it looked like here and what it looked like there and what you lost or what you didn't lose, I think you'd be in a really safe place. And I think as a a financial organization, that's what we're more concerned about. But to your point, we're in a brave new world. So yes, it's all new.
If you're going to get any magic answers tonight from us.
Not a problem. I've come to understand that there are no magic answers, just progress.
But I wish we had been making more progress. Yes, we thought ISO 23081 Part 3 was going to actually give us metadata that's recommended for records, but it didn't go far enough. They couldn't come to agreement, the committee that was working on it, so still got a problem there. I see Deirdre has a question. Deirdre, can you tell me what do you mean as far as metadata in diplomatics? Or is something else, archiving? I know what she means is in terms of applying diplomatics term standards, no, not yet. What she's referring referring to is the University of British Columbia, and I do work with a doctoral student there who's actually doing her research on social media, and the couple of Canadian local governments, but what they're doing is, again, just the exploratory stage, and so no. I don't know of anything. They had an enterprise project for several years that was supposed to get to the point of resulting in metadata, and that too did not develop what had been hoped. They've done wonderful work, but no, we don't have anything as far as a RIM standard to come out of that either. Yeah, I see your slide too, just fine. It's your last one with Q&A. You're okay. I think at this point, because we are 2 minutes after the hour, I'm going to say thank you very much. I appreciate your presenting to the students tonight. We'll have our recording ready after this for those who could not be here. And within a couple of weeks, as quickly as our IT people can get to it, we'll have a webcast on the same page that announced your social media presentation. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and thank you, Anil, for presenting. It was just very, very educational, very informative. I enjoyed it.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. It really was my pleasure, so I appreciate it.
Good night, everyone.